right, good morning to you. Great to see you. Hope we had a good campus preview weekend, although they didn't stay all weekend, but it felt like that, didn't it? It was a good time. So thank you for participating, and thank you so much for what you did to welcome students from all over the place and give them a glimpse of what TFC life is all about. I want to welcome you to Grace Chapel this morning as we practice community worship with one another today. We're focusing on the issue of life. I was reading in Psalm 139 this morning, and I was impressed with what the psalmist had to say, how God has intimate knowledge of you and me, and how God abides with us in his presence. But he goes deeper than that to begin to talk about, it's not just about knowing us, it's not just about being present with us, but that God intimately loves us. Listen to the way the psalmist begins to talk about this reality. He says, "For it was you, God, who formed me in my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. For my frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty," hear that, the psalmist says, "how weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of your thoughts. I try to count them, they're more than the sand. I come to the end, I am still with you." As we come together to worship as a community this morning, we come together with the knowledge that God has invited us into this intimate, loving relationship. But that love is something that he's had for us from the very beginning. So as we come into worship this morning, I invite you to relax into the reality of that love. As we talk about that this morning and sing about it, may we do so with all of our hearts. Will you stand with me this morning? And let's continue as we move into this time of worship together in music. Get after it.
Should nothing of our efforts stand, no legacy survive, God shall live with us and be our steadfast light, and we shall ere his people be. Oh, glory be to Christ. Oh, glory be to Christ our King. Oh, glory be to Christ. His rule and reign will ever sing. Oh, glory be to Christ.
I just want to read back the first line of that song. Should nothing of our efforts stand, no legacy survive, unless the Lord does raise the house, in vain its builders strive. This is a simple but powerful message. All glory be to Christ because he is enough. We're not working to earn our salvation anymore. We are called to enjoy a relationship with Christ because he has already done the work. So I just want to challenge you guys, challenge anyone who's still working to earn their salvation or just for tomorrow's gain. I just want to challenge you guys as we sing this song just to enjoy the relationship that you have with Christ. Quiet. In the quiet, in the stillness, I know that you are God. In the secret of your presence, I know you am restored. And when you call, I won't refuse. And each new day again I'll choose. There's no one, and there is no one else for me. None but Jesus, and crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. In the chaos, in confusion, I know you're sovereign still. In the moment of my weakness, you give me grace to do your will. And when you call, I won't delay. of my strength and all my delight is in you, Lord, forevermore. There is no one else for me, none but Jesus, and crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. Now I live to bring him praise. Father, thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the sacrifice and for a relationship that we can now enjoy, a relationship that we can put our trust and our hope in and our strength, and that we can now live in relationship with you. Thank you and I praise you. Bless this time. And in Jesus' name I pray, amen.
I invite you to be seated. This might be a little too much information this morning, so if it is, I'll go ahead and apologize. It was 3:30 in the morning this last Sunday when I had to get up and go to the bathroom. Yes, I'd been asleep for about 4 hours and had to get up and go to the bathroom. And I just happened, when I was coming back to bed, noticed that an email had come through since the time I'd gone to bed, and I'd gone to the bathroom. And so I opened it up, and it was Scott Klusendorf. All right, Scott Klusendorf. And the email said, Chris, I'm in Calgary, Canada, and sickness has fallen heavily upon me. I don't think I'm going to have a voice in order to come and speak at TFC. He said, but it's okay. He said, I have a team of 5 people who are second to none. He said, they won't miss a beat. They'll come and they'll be able to share the messages that I was really coming to share with you. And they'll probably do a better job of it than I would. And so he said, I'm sending you Jay Watts. And so this morning I'm excited to say, that Life Training Institute has sent Jay Watts to come and talk to us about this important issue that we're dealing with in our culture right now when it comes to life. And the Life Training Institute does a great job of holding up truth, of holding up this issue of human dignity and intrinsic value. And they begin to communicate it in ways, though, that are compassionate and gracious and invite people, regardless of their political persuasions or their worldview, to consider the truth of the matter about these kinds of things. So I'm excited to have Jay Watts with us. I'm going to invite him to the stage. I want to welcome you to invite him. And fasten your seatbelts this morning. Fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be fun. Jay, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. I am thrilled to be here, although it was a surprise to me. He may have found out about it Sunday. I found out about it yesterday morning as I was going to speak somewhere else. But as Chris and I were talking about backstage, what was a surprise to me was never a surprise to God, so I was intended to be here all along and to be here with you fine people. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to be starting in James chapter 4, verse 17 is the scripture that I want to begin with. James 4:17. I love the book of James because one of the things I love about it is it's driven some of the greatest minds and some of the most powerful Christians in church history crazy with its emphasis on works. But it is not a works-based gospel that it preaches. But what the book of James tells us is that what we do communicates better to the world who we are internally than anything else. That if you believe yourself to be a Christian and yet your life is filled with things like gossip and violence of talk and violence of towards other people, and if you live one way while other people are being oppressed and live off of that oppression, and all of these things, you demonstrate a lack of knowledge of what the kingdom of Christ is all about, what the kingdom of God is about, what he came to do, what he came to establish in your life. And so through all of this, it gives us several different things that it says to watch out for. But in the midst of all of that, in James 4:17, it says, whoever knows what is right to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. This is the introduction of a new kind of sin into discussion. There are two types of sins. There are those that we commit, sins of commission, acts that we do that violate the word of God. And then there are things that are called sins of omission, good things that we ought to do. When we know the right steps, the right things that we're supposed to do, and we fail to do those things, whatever else we do, the failure to do that right thing was a sin. A failure to act. What I want to do today is to make a case to you of what I have become convinced of in my life. And over the next 2 days, that the failure to have a voice in our culture that talks about the value of human life, that speaks up on some of the most important moral issues the world has ever faced, and there has never been a generation on this earth for whom it was more urgent to answer questions like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a human being valuable? Who counts as members of the human family? There has never been a generation on earth for whom it was more urgent to be able to answer that question than yours is today. Your generation will face challenges on the nature of human life that no generation that came before you could have ever dreamed of. And primarily as we begin today, I'm going to make it on the case of the value of human life as it relates to the issue of abortion. This morning, I will make my case. Tonight, there will be an opportunity for me to get more academic and more in detailed about the arguments against the position that I'm going to offer this morning. And then tomorrow morning, I will delve more into other arguments. You have the opportunity anytime you see me around campus, either tonight or if you see me just wandering around, we happen to run into each other, to ask me whatever question you want during the time that I'm here. I want to make this case, and this morning, the basic case for life, using a three-pronged approach. One, focusing on the single question that is most important to answer this issue, to discover the moral nature of it, to figure out the right and wrong of the issue of abortion. And that question is, what is the unborn? The second prong of it will be that I'm going to argue using science and philosophy. I am unapologetically and passionately a Christian man. But I've had the opportunity to speak at some of the coolest places on earth, and when I go into those places and I have the opportunity to engage audiences, sometimes fiercely secular audiences. One time I had an audience of about 1,500 people. About 98% of them passionately disagreed with the position that I was putting forth. And when I went in there and got in front of them, I did not argue my faith. I argued using science and philosophy because I was once on the other side of this issue. I was once a pro-choice atheist. And so I know what it feels like when somebody argues on grounds for which we have no common area of agreement. And so I try to begin the discussion in a place where we have common ground. And so I use science, the science of embryology, and philosophy. The science to discuss what we are, the philosophy to discuss why we matter. And then very briefly, I'm going to talk today and tomorrow more at length about the need to argue well. For me as a Christian man, to argue in a way that honors Christ. To carry a message to the world that all human beings have equal dignity, intrinsic value, as a Christian, the image bearers of God, and to carry that message in a way that does not allow sometimes the heated and passionate way that people argue this to allow me to dehumanize them in my efforts to convince them that they're wrong. To treat them as if they didn't have the same value that I have and every other human being that I meet has. So that's my approach. The first one I said I was going to focus on the question, what are the unborn? Why do I say that we have a responsibility to engage this issue? Well, no matter what side of this issue you're on, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, the moral cost of being wrong is too high to ignore this issue. But here's the problem. We have a high moral cost. And what I mean by that is, let's say for the sake of the start of this argument, let's say the case I'm about to make is correct, that the unborn are full members of the human family, and the act of abortion, it is the unjust, intentional destruction of an innocent human life. If that's true, if that's the case, then we're talking about a world in which we live in just the United States, where somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million lives are lost every year through the practice of elective abortion. Somewhere around 60 million since 1973 in Roe v. Wade. In China, since the one-child policy was enacted in 1971, we're looking at somewhere of about 400 million abortions in China alone. That's just two nations, and the numbers that I just gave you surpass the entire population of the United States, twice that of the entire continent of Australia combined. And you can probably start throwing in some Western European countries on top of that as well, and you won't get to that number that I just gave you. Whole nations of life wiped from the face of the earth through the practice of elective abortion. If they matter, this is the intentional destruction of human life on a scale the world has never experienced or seen before. It far surpasses the numbers that we see in wars. Far surpasses them. If I'm wrong, and if they don't matter, then we live in a time, however well-meaning I am as an individual or the organization that I work for is, no matter how well-meaning or well-intended massive worldwide institutions like the Catholic Church are, and the massive body of people represented by both believers and non-believers who are making an effort to convince the world that this is an evil or this is unjust and it ought to be stopped. And we're interfering with politics at presidential elections, Supreme Court nominations. Right now, the country of Ireland is divided over this issue. And there are people split and protesting in the streets. We have invitations to multiple dozens of countries around the world. And just next week, we're sending an entire team, including me, over to London and to England to talk about this here. This is not just an American issue, and all of this division and all of this argument and all of this work that is being done, if I'm wrong and people who hold my view are wrong, is over nothing. A worldwide effort to interfere with women to get access to a medical procedure that has no greater moral component to a tooth extraction. It is literally nothing. And yet we have families sitting around the dinner table at Thanksgiving divided over this issue and arguing and fighting. If they don't matter, it may be the greatest waste of resources, both emotional, spiritual, and in addition to that, financial, that the world has ever seen. There's no way to look at this, no way to come at this, where it's the kind of thing we can just not talk about. We have a moral responsibility to engage the most important issues. Throw away that old axiom that says you should not talk about politics or religion at parties. Those are the most interesting things to talk about. They have the greatest moral cost to them, and so we should engage them at every opportunity. And so what I want to do now is, through this brief discussion, talk about how we can do that effectively. First of all, I said we're going to focus on the question, what is the unborn? Why is that so important? Greg Kokel, who runs an organization called Stand to Reason, he was talking actually with my boss, Scott Glusendorf, many years ago now over lunch, and he said, I want to find a way to help people to see why that question is central to this issue. And he said, I think I came up with a good thought experiment, a good analogy. He said, imagine you're at your sink and you're washing dishes. And here's my attention, it's focused here. And my daughter, for the purpose of this discussion, will use my 9-year-old daughter, Nika. She walks into the room behind me. And while I'm looking here, she asked this question. Daddy, can I kill this? Can I kill this? It's admittedly a grim question, but if you're ever around small children, they ask weird things all the time. What is it that I have to find out first before I answer her? What is she wanting to kill? Yeah, that's vital information, right? Everything depends on how we answer that question. And my attention's here. I need to determine that before I say yes or no. She could have anything. I tell people up north in different parts of the country about palmetto bugs, and they freak out a little bit when I tell them that we have these cockroaches the size of small cats that run across the floor every once in a while. So they live out in the trees, but they get into the house, and if one of those things runs across the floor, it's a little freaky. And so if my daughter has caught one, you may be a cockroach lover and you hate what I'm about to say. Kill it. You know, I had this woman get very upset with me one time after my talk, and she came up to me and she said, how could you do that? They're all God's creatures. And I said, I love God's creatures. I'm an animal lover. If that thing gets in my house, it must die. It can live in peace in the trees all at once, but in my house, it dies. So if it's a cockroach, if it is especially a palmetto bug, kill it, Nika. I appreciate your willingness to do so. If it's the neighbor's cat or dog, it's creepy that she's asking. I'm worried I've got like a criminal mind suspect in my house now. The answer is no, we need to call the psychologist. If it's her sister, absolutely not. Let her go. What it is will determine how I answer. The problem is that as we address this issue, we almost never answer that question. We'll talk about this at greater length tomorrow, but we need to address two problems initially that people make when they engage this issue. About 95% of the people that I talk to around the country and around the world, I would say, make this first mistake. They've never asked the question, what is it at all? They've assumed that the unborn are the kind of thing they're allowed to kill, and then they've moved on with their reasoning. This is what we call begging the question. Let me help you correct the culture today. Begging the question does not mean raising the question. Begging the question is a philosophical mistake that we make when we assume the truth of a premise that we needed to demonstrate in our argument in our conclusion. And I show you how they make this mistake, and I'll give you one example today and more tomorrow. One time I was speaking out in California, and this faculty member at this school stood up behind the back, and he said, "Mr. Watts, abortion must remain legal to protect the privacy rights of women." He said, women have a right to privacy. They have a right to make private medical decisions without the interference of the state or the community, which, by the way, I'm a deeply introverted individual. It may seem weird to hear that from a speaker, but this is my job. This is what I do for a living. When I go home, I read my books. I want to be left alone with my family. I'm deeply private, and look, man, I appreciate privacy as well. I'm on your side. I love privacy. But you've made a mistake. You've assumed that the unborn are the kind of thing that we should be free to kill, and let me help you to see that. Here's a tool we call Trot Out the Toddler. I put my hand on my hip and I said, "Sir, imagine for a second I have a 2-year-old child sitting next to me. This 2-year-old little girl is my next door neighbor's daughter, and every night in the privacy of her own home, her father viciously abuses her. Her life is one abusive episode after another. Her life is one humiliating episode after another in the privacy of their own home. Would it be okay with you, sir, if we violated the privacy of this family, went into this house, empowered the community through the Department of Child Family Services to go into this house and take that child out to rescue them from that abuse?" And he said, "Of course," without a moment's hesitation, "Of course, yes." I said, "Okay, why? Why is that okay?" And he said, "Well, it's wrong." I said, "So it's a private matter. It's happening in the privacy of their own home." He said, "That doesn't matter." So why does it matter? "You just said you thought privacy was important." I said, "Well, they can't do that." And I said, "Why?" And we went back and forth like this until finally he said, as he got frustrated with me, "Mr. Watts, privacy is not a justification for the abuse of other human beings." I said, "I agree with you. So if the unborn are human in the same way that this little girl is, then we can both agree that privacy is an important value that we should seek to protect in our country, but that privacy has reasonable limits, and that we ought not to allow other human beings to be abused or killed in the name of privacy." So the question is not privacy. The question is, what are they? Are they like us or are they not? The second mistake that we make is that we take what is an objective moral claim and we drop it down into the realm of preference claims. I want to cover this very briefly. Here's water here, but if you'd seen when I was earlier, I had a big old large Coke from Quick Trip. That's what I needed as fuel to get here when I got in my car at 6 o'clock in the morning to drive up here. I love Coca-Cola. I think it is God's most perfect liquid that he's ever made. I hate Pepsi with a passion that burns with the heat of 1,000 suns. I think it ought to be expunged from the human experience. I speak all over the country, and you go to regions of this country that are deeply Pepsi people, and you'd be surprised at how angry they get when I say that sort of thing. And they inundate my Facebook page with hashtag Team Pepsi, hashtag Pepsi for life, and I tell them I don't care. I don't care what you like, not at all. And you don't have to care that I like Coke. See, those are preference claims. That's subjective information. I'm telling you something about me, the subjects, my likes, my preferences. I like Coke. I like Granny Smith apples. I like them green. I like them sour and crunchy and delicious. My daughter likes red, squishy, disgusting sweet apples. That's a difference of opinion, a difference of preferences. But when somebody comes up to me after a talk or stands up during Q&A or at any time confronts me and says, "Mr. Watts, if you don't like abortion, then don't have it, don't be involved with it, but leave it alone for the rest of us." They have made a fundamental mistake. Or if somebody says to me, "I think abortion's wrong personally, but I don't think I should tell other people what they can and can't do." See, what I'm talking about is not Coke and Pepsi. It's not green apples versus red apples. Those are preference claims. What we're talking about is an objective moral claim. What I'm saying is not that I don't like it, but that it's wrong. And it's wrong because of the unjust, intentional killing of innocent human beings. I may be wrong about that point, but the nature of our disagreement has to be clarifying what they are, not how I feel. How I feel, my emotional condition or state towards the unborn is completely and totally irrelevant to determining the nature of their life. It's what they are that matters, not what my emotional state towards them is. And so we say, look, when we're talking about objective moral claims, if I said something to you like, if you said something to me like, "Mr. Watts, child abuse is wrong. And I responded back to you, well, you may not like child abuse, but I love it. And I'm going to abuse my kids every chance I get, and sometimes I abuse neighbor kids, and I'll abuse every kid I get my hands on. You would be like, there is something deeply wrong with this guy. He doesn't understand that idea that child abuse is wrong is not like Coke and Pepsi or green apples and red apples. I don't get to choose to like child abuse. I don't get to choose to like hurting other human beings. So when we're talking about this issue, we need to put it where it belongs in the objective realm. It's either objectively wrong or it's not wrong at all. But we can't make the mistake of constantly mistakenly dropping it back into the area of preference claims. So those are the two big mistakes, and we'll talk about those more later and some more of that tomorrow. But now we need to make a case. I said I'd make my case using science and philosophy. I'll start off with science and the science of embryology, because as I said, I'm unapologetically and passionately Christian. But if I start to talk about my religious beliefs, the first thing they're going to say is, that's okay for you. That's what you believe. But that doesn't have anything to do with me. And so I want to start at a place where we can find some area of common agreement, some place where we're okay and that they and I agree. So what I do in the science of embryology, and why the science of embryology, is because it is the area or study of science that is most concerned with questions like, when does an organism begin to exist? And the science of embryology tells us from the moment that they come into existence, when they are a single-celled organism, the unborn are whole, distinct, and living human organisms. Whole, distinct, and living human organisms from the moment they come into existence. And for those of you who are not familiar with the more sophisticated arguments from the pro-choice side, you may be surprised to find out that I know of one sophisticated defender of the pro-choice position anywhere in the world on an academic level that disagrees with what I just said. One. Every single other one of them agrees with what I just said. They're whole, they're not a part of anything else. From the moment they come into existence, they are an organism that serves its own purpose, its own growth, its own maturation process. The very first thing that happens is a thing called a glycoprotein shell called the zona pellucida hardens. It does that to keep anything from the outside from getting in, so that it has the opportunity to continue to develop and to continue to come as an individual, as an organism. It's protecting itself from the environment that it finds itself in. It's protecting itself from its mother's immune system. It's giving itself to grow and to get past this early form of its maturation process and developing inwardly in accordance with its own developmental future and track. It is distinct. It is unlike any cell in the body of its mother and its father. And it is living. It meets every criterion necessary to be considered alive. It has metabolism, cellular reproduction. It responds to stimuli. Whole, distinct, and living from the moment it comes into existence. Here's a quote from Peter Singer, who wrote the book Practical Ethics. If you've taken ethics, I assume you've read this book. He is one of the most influential ethicists on the planet. He's also one of the most influential pro-choice ethicists on the planet. And he says in his second edition, it is possible to give human being a precise meaning. We can use this equivalent to a member of the species Homo sapiens. Whether a being is a member of that species is something that can be determined scientifically by an examination of the nature of the chromosomes and the cells of living organisms. In this sense, there is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and eggs is a human being. Dr. Michelin Matthews Roth from Harvard Medical School said before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in 1981, so therefore it is scientifically correct to say that an individual life begins at conception when egg and sperm join to form the zygote, and this developing human always is a member of our species in all stages of its life. This is so easy to understand that several years ago, we were sitting around the dinner table, and it was at the time my 10-year-old son, my 8-year-old daughter, my 4-year-old daughter, my wife and I. My son in the middle of dinner says, "Hey, Mom, did you know that inside the man's body, there's a cell called a sperm? And inside the woman's body, there's a cell called an egg." And then he starts to move his fingers together, which was a little creepy. He's like, and when these two things get together, boom, that's how life begins. And so my wife shoots me a look over the dinner table like this is somehow my fault that the kid's talking about this. I said, "I have no idea why Peyton's talking about this right now." And she said, "Yes, I did know that, Peyton. But how do you know that?" And he said, "Well, I was in Daddy's study area, and there was a book on the shelf called an anatomy book, and I pulled that down and started flipping through that." He's like, "And I read some fascinating stuff, and that was one of them." And he tells us this, so he's like, "I don't want you guys to worry about it or anything, because apparently it's happened like once a month or something. I'm not really clear on that, but it's not happening all the time or anything." And we're like, "Woo, thanks, buddy. We appreciate that." So My 10-year-old son, he looks at an anatomy book, not a Christian anatomy book, not a pro-life anatomy book, an anatomy book. And he understands what I just told you. Whole, distinct, and living from the moment they come into existence. That's what everybody knows. Almost everybody agrees with it at the sophisticated level where you're talking about the academics that frame the pro-choice position, when you're talking about the people who write embryology textbooks. I have never met personally one who disagrees with that, and I'm aware of only one person out there that I know that fights against that at that high level. Now, let me start. We're about to show a brief video. No one in this room is obligated to watch what we're about to show. There's no audio to it other than a piano accompaniment. You are allowed to look away. I will warn you before it shows you. I will tell you when it's over. So you have no responsibility to see anything that you don't want to see. And let me say two things about this video before I show it. Number one, in my organization, I am known as the person who hates what I'm about to show you the most. And I hate asking people for the right to show it. Number two, I don't show this for any reason of judgment. I mentioned earlier that I was an atheist. That does not mean that I was in any way morally worse than other people out there, but as an atheist, I wasn't a good guy. I hurt people. Anybody who wanted to love me or care about me or cared about my future, I caused them pain and misery. I betrayed people. I was a terrible human being. And because I have received the grace through the gospel of Jesus Christ, I have no interest in making anyone else out there feel bad about the things of their past. What I show, I don't show for judgment, I show for clarity, because I know what it's like to be at a university campus. I know what it's like when I'll be in the middle of a conversation and it turns to coffee talk, where we're just knocking around the idea of whether human beings matter or whether they don't, or whether this is a moral evil or whether it's not. And so what I show for clarity, not for judgment. And I show it even though I hate it, knowing that in order for us to have the best conversation possible, we have to be clear about what it is that we're talking about. So look away now. In 1 minute, I'll tell you it's over. And if y'all could go ahead and show the video. It's over. Why show something like that? There have been arguments about the value of human life going on for every generation that preceded us, and injustices that are done to other human beings. There is no way for us to understand them unless we understand exactly what we're talking about. There was a reason why when William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson and other people were trying their best to convince the British Empire they could survive without slavery, that it was necessary to do more than to create good arguments. It was necessary sometimes to take the rich people that were living on the wealth that was generated by slavery down to the docks and put them on slave ships and make them smell the death that their life was built on. There was a reason that when we were arguing that children should not be forced to work in ungodly conditions in the earliest 20th century, that we had to show pictures of those children and what they were dealing with and what they were going through and how they were being treated, so the world didn't just hear an argument about whether it's okay to let kids work, but they understood we're asking, is it okay to put children in a position where they can get sucked into machines and lose limbs or fingers or be killed because their families are desperate and need help? There's a reason why every movement that is framing people, human life, as valuable, it was necessary to show them, because without seeing them, we never fully understand the nature of the evil we're talking about. It's always easier to just say, wait. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about that in his letter from a Birmingham jail. It says, it's always easy for those of you who are not oppressed to say, wait. It's always easy for those of you who are not the victims to say, wait, who don't have to live with it every day. And only by showing people, by opening it up and letting them see what we're talking about, can we get clarity on what we're saying. Because the question is, if they're whole, distinct, and living human beings from the moment they come into existence, why are we allowed to do that to other human beings? Abortion is an action, an intentional action against other human beings, and it's happening in reality thousands of times a day in this country alone, millions of times all over the world, somewhere about 40 millions of times all over the world every year. It's something that we're doing, and we need to understand, or at least be clear about what we're defending if we choose to defend it. That is the question. And why is that okay? What are they that we're allowed to do that to them? Now, I ask questions when I'm talking to people on campuses, and I'll have a young man in front of me who represents the other side, and I'll say to him, let me ask you a question. It's called a diagnostic question. It's meant to get a lot of information in a very short period of time. And I ask him this question. I say, young man, would it be intentionally wrong, or would it be objectively wrong for me to kill you right now? Only twice in all the years I've asked that question, I've had somebody say no. Both of them were in San Francisco, oddly enough. Twice have I had somebody say no. Everybody else says, yes, it would be objectively wrong for you to kill me right now. And so here's the question I ask after that, because I agree. I agree that such a thing is objective moral values. I agree that human beings have value. I agree that it would be wrong to kill him, even though I don't know him and have no moral duties and obligations as him, rooted in family connection. I said, so what changed? What changed from the embryo or fetus that you once were to the young man standing in front of me today? That if I did that to you then, it would be a constitutionally protected right. As a matter of fact, there's nothing wrong I can do to you by definition because you don't matter. What changed that I could do that to you then? And then the moment that whatever you're about to tell me happened, the moment that this change occurred in the life of that human being, suddenly what I could do to you a moment ago with no moral cost to it whatsoever becomes the worst thing that I could possibly do to another human being. That is the philosophical change of account that must be explained in this change. Here I can do whatever I want to you, whatever you tell me the reason is that I can't do it to now. When that thing happened, it went from being nothing to the worst thing that I could do to another human being. What is it that you're going to give me to explain that? And the philosophical answers they give us range in what they call Stephen Schwartz's SLED acronym. It says differences of size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency. They're going to give you one of those answers because that's all they can give you: size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency. If their argument is that you didn't matter then, but you do now, it was okay to do that to you then, but not now, something about your size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency will account for that value. See, I'm arguing that what makes you valuable is what you are. You're intrinsically valuable by virtue of your humanity. That when we experience this sensation, this intuition of universal human value and rights, when we see things going on in other cultures and other parts of the world, and we see children in Syria and Aleppo living under conditions, war conditions, violence, that no child should ever have to grow up in, and we say, that's wrong. We're appealing to an idea of universal human rights. When we see women being treated certain ways in other cultures, and we say women should never be treated like that, when we look at any other part of the world and interfere in their minds in the moral judgment of their culture or the world that they live in with the idea that that's wrong, we're appealing to something that's greater than countries, greater than nations, that's universally held among all people. A sense of equal right, equal dignity, equal value. And the only thing that explains that is what we all share equally. It must be grounded in something that we all hold equally, and that's one thing, our humanity. But if they say size, you were smaller then, you're much larger now. My son, at 15 years old, is about 6'1", 180 pounds. He looks down on me, which is weird because most of his life I looked down on him. But he towers over me and eats all my food now. And I see him in the kitchen, and I look at him like, my goodness, he's big. But it would be weird for me to think he's huge. It would be very wrong to kill him now. He is very valuable. Or for us to look at smaller people that we see walking on the street and be like, oh my goodness, look how small they are. They can't hold value. That's so sad. We don't see human beings' value as tied up into size. That's not the kind of thing that gives or takes value. As a matter of fact, size changes all the time. When you get my age, it changes seasonally during the years. but my value stays the same. Size, level of development, you had to attain some level of development. You grew to be able to have some capacity. Now here's two questions I always ask them. Who gave you the right to divide humanity up and say, once you can do this, you have value, and before you can do this, you don't? Who gave you the right to draw a line through humanity and say, everybody on this side, they don't matter. They're human but not persons. And everybody on this side, they're like me, and they have value. Who gave you the right to choose heartbeat or pain or brain development or organized cortical brain activity or birth or conscious awareness, which is what some people argue, which comes months after birth? Who gave you the right to say it's okay to kill those human beings? And why should I ever trust you got that right? Why should I ever trust that you have chosen the right criteria? Why should I ever believe you're capable of that type of judgment? Size, level of development, environment, where you are. Peter Singer, who I mentioned earlier, says we should be free to kill newborns with no moral compunction if there's a problem or the parents don't want them. He said newborns in themselves have no value. They have no conscious awareness, no conscious thought. As a matter of fact, a mature dog is by far much more valuable than a newborn human being. And when people recoil against that and say you can't possibly believe that, he says, why not? You can kill them before they're born. He says, what do you think happened when they were born? They're the exact same kind of thing that they were. There was no magic that happened to them on that 8-inch trip down the birth canal. If we can kill them there, we can kill them here. Nothing changed but where they are. I agree with him. I just don't think we should kill newborns. And so for the same reason, I don't think we should kill them by virtue of where they are either. And finally, degree of dependence. We'll say they're very dependent in a way that others are not. They need in a way that others don't. Degree of dependence is important that you use that term degree because we are all dependent on community. But here before, as I close this morning, I want to say this. I talked about James 4:17. Also in James chapter 1, verse 27, I believe it is, where God says through the book of James that religion that he accepts as pure is to go out among the widows and orphans and to remain undefiled by the world. See, what God sees in dependence is service, opportunity, duty to others. In this culture, increasingly, when we see those people who are dependent, we see burden, interference with the way that we wish to live. We see a duty to get out of the way. Those two cannot live comfortably with one another. My daughter is a type 1 diabetic. One day at the age of 8, she was fiercely independent. Now she lives a life of dependence. I have an app on my phone that requires me to keep track of her blood glucose level. Hopefully you wouldn't look at somebody who can't sleep through the night sometimes without me waking her up and giving her juice to keep her blood glucose level in a safe place and say it's okay to kill them. They have a lesser value. Or at least killing them would be a lesser crime. Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependence. They don't do the work necessary to explain why we can do that then, but not now. That is a massive, massive philosophical check that must be accounted for. I'm going to bow our heads in prayer. And then we'll close, and I believe Chris will come out and say a quick word. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to talk this morning. I pray, God, that we evaluate how we answer the question, what are the unborn, that we think about the idea of who and what they are and what we're doing to them, that we start to ask serious questions of ourselves and the world that we live in. What makes human life valuable? Who counts as a part of our human family? And what are we not allowed to do to them? And what are we forbidden to do to them? And I pray that we start to think deeply on these things and talk to each other about them. And that we look at the world around us and don't just accept it as it is or see problems as intractable that can't be dealt with. But that we remember, and that I remember every day, I have a responsibility, if I see wrong, to do something, to make some voice, to make some stand. And I pray for all of those who are unconvinced one way or another, that they see that they have a responsibility before you if they love you, to ask that question, who are your children? Who are your image bearers? And what is my duty to them? In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Before we leave, I want to invite you to unbuckle your seatbelts, right, as he's moved us through this time. This has been a helpful time. We have 2 more opportunities to listen to his thoughtful discussion about this very important issue. In Warner Mission 104 this evening from 6 to 8 with Toccoa Falls for Life, you have an opportunity to engage this and also to engage in a time of question and answer. And then Jay will also be back with us tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock here in community worship to advance and bring conclusion to this discussion today. I also want to draw your attention tomorrow night on Wednesday. There's a special time of worship that will be held in the gym. And so invite you to be a part of that as well. We'll talk more about those things tomorrow. Have a great day.